Welcome to the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast. I'm K.M. Weiland, and I am here to take you deep with story theory, writing techniques, and the incredible wisdom of story. I believe story is the greatest power on this earth, and that as writers, we carry the torch of wielding that power with responsibility, passion, and skill. There's no such thing as just a story. Today, it is my honor and my purpose to help you write your best story, astound the world, and maybe change your life. Hello and welcome to Season 17, Episode 22. So before we get started today, I'm excited to share something new that I've been working on. Over the summer, I secretly created a whole collection of digital worksheets for writers, more than 20 in all. These are fillable, printable PDFs designed to help you with everything from structuring your story and brainstorming character arcs to exploring theme and interviewing your characters. They're meant to be fun, practical tools that give you clarity when you need it most, while also sparking new insights into your writing. You can find the entire collection in my new Etsy shop or in my store at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And if you do check them out on Etsy, I'd love it if you'd also leave a review, since your support is really what helps the shop get off to a strong start. All right, so with that said, welcome to today's episode. Why all stories are myth and how they transform us. Stories are more than just entertainment. They're also more than just reflections of real life. And this is because at its core, narrative is myth. Whether you're crafting epic fantasy, gritty crime drama, or cozy rom-coms, deep archetypal patterns always echo through your characters' plots and themes. Story is the theater of the psyche. It is a dream we collectively dream, in which each character and conflict embodies a part of ourselves. When we recognize this hidden foundation, we can tap this archetypal power to access the kind of storytelling that not only captivates readers, but also transforms both their inner lives and our own. So a few weeks ago, the last episode I shared was one that struck a chord with many of you. It was about my deep desire to witness the return of soulful storytelling. And specifically, I wrote about my personal dissatisfaction and even boredom with contemporary filmmaking. In that post, I talked about wanting to return to stories of subtextual depth, emotional earnestness, and good-heartedness, among other qualities. But in pondering on this further via the many thoughtful exchanges I got to have with all of you in the comment sections on that post, I realized there are more layers to the shifts we have seen in modern storytelling, and the next shift I believe we will soon see. One of those layers is the tension that we often feel, but perhaps do not always recognize, between hyper-realism in fiction and storytelling's inherently mythic foundation. I'm talking about the differences between stories that dutifully mimic or even exaggerate the causality of everyday life and those that draw upon the timeless archetypal patterns of the psyche. Now, when asked to define story, we may reach for the convenient answer that story is a replication of real life. But this, I will posit, is not actually true. Throughout history, we have increasingly dressed our stories in the verisimilitude of realistic details and the self-consciousness of our mind's inner workings. But underneath all that hyper-realism, the true and archetypal shape of story itself remains something quite mythic. It is much less a product of our conscious minds, our conscious and scientific understanding of the world's workings and our place in it, and much more a product of our unconscious minds, our symbolic and dreaming selves. Recognizing storytelling, no matter the genre, as inherently mythic allows us as storytellers to walk onto a much bigger stage. We exit the relatively small stage of the self we know, the conscious self, and enter the vastness of the self that lives beyond consciousness, and therefore beyond the restricted understanding allowed by the ego. When we approach story as something inherently mythic, an archetype that exists outside and beyond humanity's creation of it as an art form, we regain the capacity to create stories that touch the deepest parts of ourselves to create not just transformation, but initiation. From the far depths of human memory, story comes to us as a primordial force. Indeed, human memory itself is a story. Before we packaged stories for $20 mass consumption, before movies, before novels, stories came to us as oral myths, ritual dramas, stone etchings, and catalysts of initiation. Nowadays, storytelling is a highly specialized skill set. We come to podcasts like this one to study beat sheets and timing. We divide stories into highly specialized genres and check tropes off a list. We come to story as if it is something we can master. But in approaching story like this, we risk missing not just the deeper initiation story wants to offer each of us, we also risk missing out on the best possible stories we could be sharing with our own audiences. I want to talk about one trend in particular that I see in modern storytelling. In itself, this trend is not problematic, but when too much emphasis is placed on it, it can create a polarized experience of story that can weaken its deeper impact. This trend, as I hinted previously, is hyper-realism. It is the trend, all but ubiquitous now, of faithfully recreating modern life on the page or the screen. In some ways, we might say it is showing rather than telling. And again, I'm not saying this approach is wrong. I love detailed fiction that shows me the story world with such dimensionality that I'm there. I love deep POVs that faithfully mine and recreate the complexities of human interiority, everything from memory to motive. But my feeling is that when this hyperrealism is not founded upon the deeper mythology of story itself, we often risk losing the forest for the trees. I will even go so far as to say this approach is a driving force behind the type of modern storytelling that carries characters and audiences to destinations awash with sophisticated despair or, at best, ambiguous apathy. And this is not to say mythic stories do not confront their fair portion of darkness and despair. But as I continue to study story as an archetype, it is my belief that these old stories, everything from the creation stories to the Odyssey to old folk tales like Little Red Riding Hood, speak to us first and always in metaphor and symbol. Certainly, as we explore the continuity with which the shape of story comes to us over the eons, I believe we can see that story itself is much more than simply a mirror of life. It is an initiatory force. At the end of his book, Becoming Supernatural, Dr. Joe Dispenza defined initiation. He said, "I believe we are on the verge of a great evolutionary jump. Another way to say it is that we are going through an initiation. After all, isn't an initiation a rite of passage from one level of consciousness to another? And isn't it designed to challenge the fabric of who we are so we can grow to a greater potential?" Story is a symbolic map of transformation. It is a blueprint for growth and change. I shared in the previous episode about how I will never be satisfied with even one single story that does not challenge me in some way. Because for me, that is what I look for in a story experience. I look for that frisson of electricity, that tinge of awe, as I sense, however faintly, that I am entering an uncanny space, a weird space. In the Old Norse, the concept of weird, W-Y-R-D, from which we get our word weird, W-E-I-R-D, indicated not just the uncanny, but the fated. In story, what I seek for myself are fated encounters. I seek shatter points of destiny that fracture, however slightly, reality as I know it. And every story holds the seed of this transformational power. It doesn't matter the medium or the genre, this potential is latent in all stories, whether about hellbent mobsters or romantic happily ever afters or comedic farces or historical reproductions or fantastical allegories. However, whether and how well this potential is realized depends on the author. To some extent, it depends on the author's conscious awareness of an ability to empower the story's mythic substructure. But I would say, even more perhaps, it depends on the author's personal touchstone with the mythic subconsciousness that lives within them. If we think of story as being like a dream, we are not too far from the truth. Story, true, deep, initiatory story, is something that arises from an inner depth existing beneath and beyond egoic consciousness. We are more likely to find these stories by channeling them than by trying to brainstorm them. And like dreams, stories are innately symbolic, even and perhaps especially when we do not realize it. As authors, we cannot always explain where our best work comes from. Often it seems it does not come from us. It was given to us. We are the first to be changed by it. Indeed, we may spend the rest of our lives not quite understanding it. Also, like dreams, I believe it is useful to take one more step back from the hyper-detailed and hyper-realistic showing of fiction. Until we do so, we are likely to think our stories are peopled by a varied and dimensional cast, perhaps purposefully created by us to showcase a vast number of perspectives and lifestyles. When we go deeper, we may see instead that the deepest and most mythic stories represent a single psyche. Perhaps the authors, perhaps a bit more specifically the protagonists, but ultimately the collective psyche. Some schools of dream interpretation remind the dreamer to consider that everything that shows up in a dream is you. That is, it is not your father in the dream. It is some aspect of your own psyche wearing the face of your father. And the same can be said of a story. Every character in the story, indeed everything in the story, is an aspect of one psyche. The hero, the antagonist, the love interest, the mentor, all are representations of a unified psychological perspective and experience. The deep resonance of stories that work, stories that initiate us, is the result of this inner unity. Audiences resonate because they're watching externalized inner conflicts of the self. If you start examining stories from this perspective, you may be amazed at what you discover. Now, a quite obvious example is The Lord of the Rings. I particularly remember the first time I saw the scene in Fellowship of the Ring in which the characters flee underground into the mines of Moria, where they awaken goblins and trolls in the darkness. In so many ways, this can be seen as a descent into the unconscious and a confrontation with the shadow monsters who reside forgotten there. Now, in a more realistic example, we can see how the various characters in Pride and Prejudice represent facets of a single psyche. Elizabeth and Darcy embody the central tension between pride and humility, shame and love. Jane reflects openness and generosity. Lydia personifies unchecked impulse. Mr. Collins plays the part of obsequious conformity. Lady Catherine stands as rigid authority. Read this way, Austen's novel becomes not just a social comedy, but an archetypal drama of the self, learning to reconcile its contradictions and move toward wholeness. For writers, one of the most useful tools for enlivening the power of mythic storytelling is to access the innate power of character archetypes. With all things archetypal, it is crucial to interact with archetypes not as simplistic stereotypes, but as living forces. Put simply, we don't get to dictate what archetypes do. When we have truly accessed them, they tell us what they will do. When we have truly understood them, we feel it all the way down to our bones. Archetypes are dynamic energies peopling initiatory arcs. They surface in different guises, but always point to universal human epochs. As writers, we can access these forces consciously to deepen our character arcs, themes, and story arcs. And the most obvious way we can work with these archetypes is to learn about them through the old stories. But they are found everywhere. I would go so far as to say they are found in every story that works. More than that, they are inherent, if perhaps latent, within each of us. As human beings, and especially as human beings with active imaginations, we already have a deep understanding and recognition of these archetypal forces, if we are brave enough to face them. And this cannot be taken for granted. It can often feel much easier to ignore the call of initiation and transformation. Cutting the journey short before we finish the dark night of the soul can often seem wiser. Ironically, remaining cozy and cynical in the affirming arms of despair can feel much safer than daring to keep walking into the unknown of transformation. What archetypal storytelling, mythic storytelling, demands of us as storytellers is that we face the archetypes themselves with authenticity and with humility. Mythic storytelling demands that we listen to the deepest, loudest, softest truths within us. We know when what we are writing is mythic and archetypal, whether we call it that or not. We know when what we are writing is the truest thing it is possible for us to write. We know in our hearts. And I do not say hearts lightly. The heart is a much better storyteller than the head. The head, however, remains a worthy ally on this journey. It is not, as it so often thinks, the protagonist, but it is a helpful sidekick. And to that end, studying the mythic journeys in literature can be extremely helpful, whether the hero's journey or the 5 further archetypal journeys I discuss in my book, Writing Archetypal Character Arcs. So, in closing, story is not just about life. It is a dream we dream together. It is a map for transformation. If we look into the past, history tells us our storytellers were our seers, our shamans, our way-showers, our most respected elders. Nowadays, we're all storytellers. We bear this great burden to look beyond what everyone else can see and to hone the transformative truths that are meant to initiate not just us, but every member of our tribe. To do that, we must start by remembering what story really is. It is not just entertainment. It is not just escapism. It is not just pleasure. It is not just a source of income. What is story? I believe the archetypal shape of story is fundamentally a truth, perhaps even the truth. It is the power to change the world over and over and over and over again. It is the power to change us. It is the power to bypass our limited egoic perceptions of ourselves, others, and our world, and to show us the weirdest depths of what it means to be human. It is a dream we dream that also dreams us. It is initiation. It is transformation. It is change. It is myth. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. If you'd like to put these insights into practice, you may want to explore my brand new archetypal character arc worksheets. This is a series of 6 fillable, downloadable guides designed to help you chart mythic journeys for your characters. Each worksheet breaks down one of the 6 archetypal arcs, Maiden, Hero, Queen, King, Crone, and Mage, into structural beat sheets, reflective questions, and story prompts. So whether you're writing an epic fantasy or modern literary fiction, these tools will help you harness archetypal storytelling, deepen your characters, and unlock the mythic power within your narrative. You can find the full set, including the discounted bundle, on my Etsy store or my website at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And I hope you'll stop by and join the conversation on this episode. We had an amazing conversation after the last episode on this topic. Do you see your own stories as mythic at their core? How do you think recognizing the archetypal foundation of storytelling might change the way you write? And that brings us to the end of this episode of Helping Writers Become Authors. I hope you'll stop by the site for a full transcript of this episode and to join in the conversation in the comments. Tune in for next week's episode, where we'll continue to explore all things writing and storytelling. If you'd like to support the podcast, it always means a ton when you take a moment to leave a quick rating or review on Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, or Spotify. To stay updated on all the latest content I create for you, the best way is to join my mailing list at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com/mailing list. You'll also immediately gain access to lots of free resources, including my books, Crafting Unforgettable Characters and 5 Secrets of Story Structure. For real-time connection with me, more writing advice, and behind-the-scenes glimpses, follow me on Instagram at authorkmwyland. A heartfelt thank you to each one of you for your support and enthusiasm, and especially those of you who support my work on patreon.com/kmwyland. You help make my site, this podcast, and so many other resources available to writers everywhere. So until next week, keep writing, keep dreaming, and most importantly, keep being true to your stories. Thank you for being part of Helping Writers Become Authors.